Let's ignore how gross this is. It overflowed the other day and clearly I did not clean it off. Welcome back to long form content. Let's start some sourdough. This is going to be my entire process from start to finish. I wanted to do this long form because it's hard to get every single step and the timing of every single step into a like 1 to 3 minute short. So let's get into it. Since this jar is looking a little rough, I'm gonna switch it into this vessel. Also, this will give it some more space to grow because I'm gonna do 2 loaves. While we're here, I'm gonna do more than 1. This has been sitting in my refrigerator since Sunday. It's currently Wednesday. It should be fine with 1 feed. If it had been in there longer than 2 weeks, I usually do 2 feeds. I just turned on my extra lights up here. I forgot I had them. Clearly, I have not done long form in a long time. This is just regular all-purpose flour. It is always what I feed my starter with, simply because bread flour is more expensive. But I do always use unbleached flour. It doesn't need to be like special all-purpose flour, I don't think, but I would highly recommend unbleached. When I first started sourdough about a year ago, I would always measure out and do a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, so the same amount of starter, flour, and water. I no longer measure anything out, especially like now where I'm basically doing like a double to triple feed. The measurements don't really matter that much, and I can kind of tell by the consistency at this point. This is filtered water. I do think that that's pretty important. I've never tried not using filtered water, but I've seen a lot of people talk about that being like a really important thing. It is 10:47 p.m. and my goal is to be able to bake with this tomorrow around 10:30 a.m. Since this has been in the refrigerator and it's cold, that timing should work out pretty decently. And I'm putting, this is cold water, and because I'm beating it a lot, so it's going to take a little bit longer to rise than it normally would, especially while it's cold outside. I have found that I cannot just wake up and feed my starter and then bake in a few hours because my house is just not hot enough for my starter to really rise the way that it needs to. So I have gotten in the habit of doing it the night before I'm ready to start making dough. This is what it's kind of looking like. It's nice and thick. I think a lot of people say pancake batter, and I would kind of agree with that. All right, now that I'm done, I'm going to loosely put the lid on like so. It's not attached at all. And then I'm going to stick it over here. Oftentimes I will turn my microwave light on. However, since I'm not looking to do anything with this for 12 hours and I kind of want it to go a little bit slower, I want it to rise a little slower, I'm not going to turn my microwave lights on. However, I am going to put my cast iron in front of it. This is my new trick to keep our cat away from it in the night, even though she doesn't typically mess with it too much. So that's it. We'll check back in the morning around 10:30 and hopefully we'll make some dough. Good morning. It is 10:20. I worked out this morning and have not had a chance to shower, but I am gonna shower after I get this going. This is my starter. I feel like she rose. Looks like right at double. Nice and bubbly, looking good. Look at her on the inside. See all these little bubbles. I'm gonna be doing 2 loaves, but I will say the measurements for 1 loaf. 165 grams of starter, 275 grams of filtered warm water. The warm part is personal choice. Just usually I want my dough to develop a little faster based on my time frame and my schedule. But if you got all the time in the day and you're not worried about it, then I would just go with like regular room temp or cold water. But I do think the warm water does help a little bit. After you get the water and the starter together, give it a nice good mix. You want it to get like kind of milky looking. Then I like to go ahead and add my salt. There are so many different ways that people add their salt in and at different stages. I like to add mine in pretty early on. So 10 grams of salt. Really in my mind, I'm just truly convinced that if I don't mix the salt in during this stage, it does not get mixed properly. 475 grams of bread flour. Now, unfortunately, I am low on bread flour and Costco did not have it this week when I went. So I'm going to be using about half and half. However, use bread flour. If you're going to the store and they have it, get bread flour. There are a lot of people that will say it doesn't matter, you can use all purpose. It's not that big of a deal, but bread flour works so much better. Like I just always get a much better oven spring, a much better rise, much better fermentation out of bread flour. Then I just take a spoon, a regular spoon, and start mixing this together. There are a lot of people that have a lot of special tools for this whole situation. Not necessary. I have used a spoon for over a year now and don't really have a reason to change. Once I'm kind of to here, where the spoon just really isn't cutting it anymore, I will get my hands wet, take the excess dough off of the spoon, and then just start working the dough with my hands. Just kneading it to where it feels like all of the water is really incorporated. I don't worry too much about the excess flour because it will get incorporated during the stretch and fold process. And you don't want to knead too much here because again, you're going to be doing all the stretch and folds. You just want to get it into like this kind of shaggy dough. Now I'm going to take this and stick it under the microwave. Just gonna cover it up with plastic wrap. That's gonna hang out there for an hour and then I'll come back at 11:30 and we'll do our first set of stretch and folds. Okay, it's been an hour. Time for the first set of stretch and folds. Going in with a wet hand, I really like scrape along the edge of the bowl to release the dough from the bowl and to also just help get any of those extra dry bits. Then I start to stretch and fold. So literally you're just stretching the dough just kind of as far as it'll go. Fold it back into itself. Quarter turn your bowl, do the same thing. I do a total of 4 sets of stretch and folds. I wait an hour, do 1 set, and then after that it's every 30 minutes until I've completed 4. Covering this back, and then I'll be back in 30 minutes. It's been another 30 minutes, so time to do another set of stretch and folds. Wet hand again. Having your hand wet just helps the dough not stick to you quite as much. Okay, this is our last set of stretch and folds. At this point, at least my dough, if you're using a lot of hydration, like a lot more water than I use in my recipe, then your dough will still probably stretch really well. Mine is getting very difficult to try to stretch. Especially the last like 1 or 2 stretches. And our very last stretch, it's not really doing anything. So when this happens, sometimes I will kind of just grab both ends and try to stretch it a little bit and flop it over. But honestly, you don't need to really overwork the dough. It'll be fine. Now it's time for the bulk fermentation. Typically, I will leave this out just as it is under my microwave lights. However, I would like for this to really rise good within the next like 4 hours just based off of my schedule today. So I am gonna stick it in the oven with the light on. That is like a nice little hack. You can do that with your starter also. Your starter / sourdough wants to be warm. The warmer it is, the better it'll rise. But right now, since it's colder outside, it just takes so much longer and I don't wanna be dealing with this all night. It's not in the cards for me today. So let's put it in the oven. Closing it up, and then I'm gonna turn the light on. It is 1:45. I'm gonna check back in on her around like 5:30, and we'll see how it's looking. I totally forgot. I didn't say anything about my starter. So for right now, I just put it back on top of my oven. I haven't decided if I want to make anything else today or tomorrow. So if I decide I don't want to make anything else, I'm gonna just put it back in the refrigerator. That's what you can kind of do with your starter. You can just leave it out on top of your counter with it not fully closed, but you will have to continue to feed it every single day if you do that. So personal choice, or you can completely seal it and stick it back in your refrigerator until the next time that you're ready to use it. It's right at 5:30, and after checking this dough, it's definitely not ready. As you can see, my finger is still really sticking to the dough, which means it's just not fully fermented yet. So gonna check back in on it in about an hour or so. Okay, my dough ended up taking about 5.5 to 6 hours to fully ferment. After you get your dough fully fermented, it's time to shape it. Sometimes I flour my surface, sometimes I don't. It depends on how sticky my dough is. I help help my dough come out of the bowl. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people say you're supposed to let it do its thing naturally, but that takes forever and then it still doesn't get everything out. So I always help mine release from the sides of the bowl. Since this was 2 loaves, I just divided it in half. Then I did add a little bit of extra flour to my banneton baskets. I like to use rice flour. It does not stick to your dough like regular, like all-purpose flour will. And also if you're using flour on your surface, I would highly, highly recommend rice flour as well, because again, it just doesn't stick to the dough. It makes it so much easier to work with. Okay, time to shape. So basically I kind of just get my dough out as flat as I can and stretch it as much as I can into a rectangular shape. And then I will fold it into the middle from each side. And then I will roll it all the way up. If you do see any of these little dry spots on your dough, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it. It used to really scare me, but it's super normal. It will still bake just fine. Once I get the dough all the way rolled up into a little bit of like a coil ball, I start to really do my tension pulls to get it into that good ball shape. I usually do this for a good 2 to 3 minutes, and I know that it's done when I can look at the bottom of the dough and I don't see like a big crease. Then I just plop the dough into the banneton basket for the overnight cold proof. Now that I've finished my second loaf, I am gonna cover these banneton baskets up with just some plastic wrap. I like to cover them extremely well, like all the way around, just to seal everything in good, and then I stick them in the refrigerator overnight. Okay, it's Friday at 6 p.m. and it's time to bake these loaves. I just pulled this out of the refrigerator and my Dutch oven has been preheating for about 30 minutes. This is one of the only tools I would actually recommend buying. This thing makes it so much easier to score your bread versus just a regular knife. Also, banneton baskets I would highly recommend as well. A lot of people say to preheat your Dutch oven for like an absurd amount of time. I don't do that. I basically just pop it in the oven while my oven itself is preheating and like coming up to temperature, and that usually takes like 20 to 30 minutes because I need it at 450, so it's got to get pretty high. Ooh. So heavy. Going in the oven at 450 for 30 minutes with the lid on. Then I'll take the lid off for the last little bit of cooking. Ooh. Also, a little trick I learned is to pull the little lining in your banneton baskets up so they'll dry out better and they won't mold. So this is how I always leave them, and I leave them out on my counter until they're fully dry, and then I will store them back in the cabinet. finished product. Here are my little sour loaf babies. I hope that this video really helps you, and I am so happy to answer any questions you may have down in the comments below. Please like this video and definitely make sure you subscribe to see more sourdough and food content.